So what's up with Analog Horror's obsession with counties? Analog Horror series love counties, and that's a fact. My guess is that an area often referred to as a county is seen as rural, out in the sticks, foresty, houses out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by land that could have anything in it. You just don't know. Maybe even giant spiders. But I also think it's one of those self-propagating genre cliches. Leave a like if you live in a county, or don't. And comment below what horrifying things haunt the area you live in. We've got deer that stand up on two legs, like in that one episode of Adventure Time where I live. They're mostly chill. Mostly. Speaking of counties, Basswood County is an analog horror series made by the creator DarkMind, which details the horrific things going on in the titular Basswood County. DarkMind has been making YouTube videos for a few years now, getting his start in 2019. But like the previous person we covered, Dr. Nowhere, he also does a lot of horror art over on Instagram and Twitter. And while his most prolific work on YouTube is Basswood County, he's also made other horror shorts on YouTube as well. I decided to give this series a watch after seeing a handful of comments recommending it, and actually found this series kind of hard to cover in my usual style. This has to do with the way that DarkMind makes his videos and the way I do. Most of DarkMind's videos seem to primarily be a way to deliver scares or are very vibe-based. I describe his style at times as avant-garde with very little to no structure, and I mean this even compared to other analog horror series that I've covered before. DarkMind seems to have an obsession with nightmares, and his videos often feel like you're experiencing a nightmare or a bad dream. This can be pretty cool when it works, but I'll admit I had trouble writing up this script because of the very nature of this. So with that in mind, we're going to do our thing and go over the overall story of the series as best we can, and critique it as well. But, as I always want to be fair, I do recommend you watch the series first and make your own judgments. In my previous analog horror video, I talked about not saying a piece of art is valueless because you don't get it, and while I am going to be a lot more critical in this video than I have before, I want you to keep that in mind. In fact, I'd love to hear your opinion on the series if you're a fan, especially if you disagree with me, or if you agree with me. I want to just kind of gauge what's going on here. And remember, these are just my thoughts and theories, and I'm only one ghost haunting your electronic devices. There's plenty more, with plenty of other thoughts out there. Having said all of that, there's something going on in Basswood County, and we've got to figure out exactly what it is. Basswood County is a place that is being haunted and terrorized by a group of entities called Humanoids. They can look exactly like you or me, but they can also look like this. Long limbs, tree-like roots or branches growing from their backs, and they're always cheesing it up for the camera, and by that I mean they have a big fat grin most of the time. Sometimes they also look like this. The people of Basswood County seem broadly aware of them. Throughout this series, it is implied that people know that they exist, and it's pretty open that these things hunt and kill people. I wonder how much housing costs in Basswood County. You'd think it'd be pretty cheap considering that, right? The first video features an analog horror staple, an emergency alert, and is aptly titled Basswood County Humanoid Alert. Of course, something is off about the tape for multiple reasons. Not only does it feature changes that make it seem haunted, it also has a lot of unnecessarily violent details about the killings these monsters are committing, as well as footage of the creature actually attacking, but there's also a couple of errors of syntax at the beginning of the tape. One is a pretty obvious error, but the other could be alluding to the video knowing you're currently in danger, which is an idea that the tapes seem to play around with, and is another staple of analog horror. But besides that, there are a couple of moments that I think are meant to be taken as serious and scary that just made me laugh and are kind of silly. Like this progression of creepy sketches that ends with this face. And then at the end, just the monster kind of like hanging out and standing around is kind of funny to me. Having said all that, this first video is alright. There are a solid couple of scares that I won't spoil, and I think DarkMind's art is pretty solid, but it's a pretty inconsistent start, and it also feels pretty derivative of other analog horror works right out of the gate. Important things to note about the episode are the time disparities between the tapes and this older piece of art that all seems to imply that the creatures have been around for a long time, including as far back as a few hundred years. Personally, I think if DarkMind had cut out the last 50 seconds and ended the video right here, it would have been stronger for it. There's already a lot of dead air in this first video, and I think it kind of ends on a low note when you had this scare and then it goes into this part, and that would have just been a great ending, I think. Now, on to the second video, which is titled Detective Jeff Alberson's Tapes 1998. There isn't really much I felt needed to be covered in this besides the second mention of Jeff Alberson, this detective. I do also enjoy this specific sketch. It reminds me of The Thing, and I just think it's pretty creepy. And I also do like this moment here because it almost makes it seem like the monster is the photographer's roommate who just happened to surprise him by taking a picture with the flash on late at night, and the monster's just like, whoa, dude, what are you doing? But yeah, nothing really happens in this video. A police officer views a tape of someone driving around, and then the monster just kind of hanging out at someone's house. The third tape is titled Identity Test, and is the most viewed video in the series, and also one of the most interesting to me. It encapsulates a lot of what I wanted to talk about with this series, both good and bad. We start with a segment that seems unrelated to the rest of the video. A scene from an old black and white movie in which one of the two characters morphs and becomes rather monstrous looking towards the end of the scene. If you've paid attention though, they are having a conversation about the person who transforms pretending to be someone he's not.
Weeks of masquerade as a French nobleman, and now it is time for you to change back and return to your provincial university. And if
which does fit the overall themes of the series. We then cut to a screen where it warns us that viewing of this tape is prohibited by law. This is important to my theories later on in the video. What follows is a test to see if you can identify these humanoid monsters versus regular people. Before that, we get some words on screen that says, "We can hear you," and I guess that's the monsters talking to us, right? Now, I'll admit that I think this identity test is kind of funny, because the fake humans are incredibly obvious, and at times the regular people look just as scary, if not more so to me. I mean, look at this dude, what the hell? This goes back and forth from being kind of silly to me actually being rather scared of it. An example of it being silly is this moment, where a character turns around having the exact same face as the one shown on the test, and then the words, "I will tell you what your mind cannot comprehend," appear on the screen over and over again. I think this moment is really cliche to analog horror. Not only that, but the other face, in my opinion, was kind of scarier. But what follows does actually kind of creep me out. The art used is really reminiscent of the Scream painting or the character King Ramsay from Courage the Cowardly Dog, both of which scared me pretty bad as a kid. Also mix that with a little bit of Richard Simmons and perfectly hits this uncanny valley level of discomfort, especially when it transforms. I actually left this up on my screen while working on this video and left the house and came back home to it and was a little perturbed that it was still up on my monitor. Like, why did I do that? The second half of the video is where it kind of takes a turn. We see a section called The Failure of Jeff Alberson, the detective from the first two parts. This segment features someone seemingly looking at evidence or notes of Alberson or something. It's kind of hard to tell, it's kind of vague, whatever they are. It's just like kind of a random assortment of stuff. This person then turns around and a creature wearing a hat similar to Alberson's appears and goes at them. Was this Jeff filming? Or was that the already taken over Jeff in the doorway? Was that Jeff's former body or something impersonating Jeff standing there going? We don't really know, we don't have enough context. Then we transition into a series of seemingly unrelated scenes to the test or the prior Jeff Alberson scene. While we are given information on where the creatures come from, what surrounds it is a rather random assortment of scenes with the monsters, which don't really connect in any way. Are they scary? Yes, some of them are, but then some of them aren't. We have about 15 seconds of someone filming a window before knocking on it, and then about 5 seconds of the monster at the window. Someone watching TV when they suddenly realize they're watching themselves, and someone drops the camera and we see a face of a creature. Someone walking around a house with creepy music in the background, and then a face appears and whispers to them. And last but not least, a statue-like monster that turns suddenly towards the person holding the camera. Now, I only caught this in editing, so I wanted to point it out, but this statue monster is supposed to be this same monster from earlier, I believe, based on this little flash that we see here and also here earlier, which is a pretty cool internal callback within the same episode. Now, I still don't know why we're seeing it. It's cool, though. I've always thought statue monsters are rad, but again, I don't know why we're seeing it. Another little gripe that I have is that sometimes the monsters are represented as really scary, but then other times, like in this identity test, they have faces like this, and honestly, it's not very scary at all. It's funny, if anything. And if you're wondering why I bring up that these scenes all feel so random and disparate, it's because it feels like we're supposed to be grasping that something is going on, but when you see all of these scenes together, it just makes you wonder, like, Like, what is going on? What did that whole Jeff Alberson scene have to do? What is going on here at the end? Are these just random people being attacked by the monsters? Why did this guy see himself being filmed? Was the monster filming him? It just all doesn't really add up, especially if this is a series and there's supposed to be some type of story going on. And you could argue like, oh yes, this is Jeff Alberson becoming a monster. This statue monster is important, but why should we care about Jeff Alberson? Why does he matter to the story that is trying to be told? What is the story that's trying to be told? It's obviously about Basswood County, but besides trying to be scary, what about what we are being shown is important to the story being told? Next is another video without much context. Titled Peaceful Life, what we watch is an informational tape on how to live a peaceful life, but instead seems to be meant to instill a sense of dread and horror in the viewer, and really that's about it. We have like a scary face here at the end, but not much else happens in this. The fifth video in the series is by far the longest and probably tied for my favorite along with Identity Test. Simply titled The Chamber, we learn about, well, the chamber. We first heard about this in Identity Test. This is where the creatures come from. It was some text that popped up along with those random scenes at the end. We learn about Calvin Basswood, who found the chamber where these creatures come from, and then promptly got the fuck out of there. After this, we as the viewers are threatened by this nice disfigured gentleman, and then we see Andy Stevens, who went missing but was found immediately after we saw this, only he was different. Then we find out about a group of researchers in 1996 who went to the chamber after seeing the high disappearance rates of people in Basswood County in only 1 month. So this basically does tell us that yes, there are probably regular people who live there, despite the fact that that just seems absolutely insane. This part has a really cool moment in the middle of it that almost feels like an old point-and-click adventure game where they're using a map and like marking these sections to see what's in the room as the researchers explore, which does have some important lore bits, but again, they're also kind of vague and other stuff that's just completely random. The important lore bits is things like this window is where they seemingly come from, so that means it probably connects to a different dimension. We also see a bunch of dead people who are disfigured in ways that we find out at the end of the video are important because apparently it means that the monsters were inside of them possibly, and also this dude is like crucified. Alright, let's actually go over the entire list of the different things that they see in the chamber. We see a TV with a frozen image of one of the monsters on it seemingly, and a tape that is actually the Identity Test tape there, as well as this weird looking doll that looks like one of the messed up face people from a previous episode. There's a table with a clock on it and also a dead woman who apparently looks as if she's melting and she's missing her eyes and teeth. There's a man right under the window who is missing the top half of his head and he's seemingly crucified. There's also what seems to be the body of Andy Stevens, or at least the top half of it. His bottom half seemed to have walked away. At the end of this tape, after seeing all of these random things, we have a doctor played by DarkMind himself, and Universe seemingly, explain the anatomy of these different creatures. They seemingly take over you by getting into a large cavity in your chest and then slowly going into your brain, and then eventually this causes your eyes and teeth to melt, or maybe that's how they leave out of you. It's kind of vague. Again, like I said, a lot of the stuff in this is kind of vague, and this goes back to why some of the bodies that were shown in the previous part are the way they are. I guess when they take you over, you lose your eyes, and the roots will eventually grow out of your back, but it is also a little confusing. Does this mean that they have to take over people to transform into them? Can they transform into them the entire time? Do they stay in the body, or do they eventually leave it like we see here? There's just not much information to go on. We then see a final transformation at the end, and part of me is like, is this after they have left a person's body? Did they like absorb how they can look through their DNA or something like that? It's here that you could probably tell one of my biggest problems with the whole series. To keep it simple, it's really random. There are a lot of things that are introduced to try and be scary that don't really go anywhere, and sometimes it does try to tie them together, but I don't feel like it always works. A great example is Andy Stevens, who looks like, or is in fact the monster from the first two tapes. But is it important that he's the monster from the earliest tapes? We also have more text meant for us as the viewers, which implies that the tapes are haunted or made by these monsters or something like that, like something is reaching out to us. But does that mean that the monsters are making and disseminating the tapes? At times they seem like unintelligent animalistic predators, but if they're smart enough to make a VHS tape to spread it around, that kind of mixes things up, doesn't it? And also, again, What is up with this damn doll? I know not everything needs to be explained, but it just feels like really random, especially if these creatures are not like human and intelligent. It hasn't said that they aren't, but we really don't know what's actually going on with them. Like, what is their purpose besides killing and taking over people? What is the world that they come from like? I know a lot of this is just me saying all these mysteries, but there's so much mystery and there's not really much to go off of to even begin to figure out what's really going on. Is Jeff Alberson dead? Why are these monsters here? Like, who is watching these tapes? Why are these tapes existing? Is it the monsters? I don't know. And this is all the while, some of the scares are also kind of hit and miss. I think I could overlook the randomness a little bit more if it was actually effectively being scary all the time, but it's not. Sometimes it's a little bit funny, and sometimes it's just you know? The next tape is called Basswood County Killer, and I actually have a couple of things to say about this, so we're gonna go on for a minute. For such a short tape, you'd think I wouldn't have much to say, but I do. So originally in this section, I talked about how it doesn't make sense that the killer is called a killer when it's one of the monsters, but it's possible, since this is one of the earliest points in the modern timeline of the series, that this was before they knew the monsters existed, but that feels like it goes against other information we've been given. Were the monsters hibernating for however long until the 90s? Like I said, it's just confusing. And to illustrate my point, I'll try to make like a timeline at the end to just show that I am doing my best to pay attention and like figure this out. I'm sure no matter what I do, there's going to be people who are saying I'm complaining too much, but that's just going to happen when you critique a series, especially when you're going over it as much as I am. Now, I actually think the second half of this video has something that is effectively creepy and scary, but it's kind of ruined by something that happens kind of early on. Let me tell you about it. You see, after the beginning of the tape, which is done in a television news broadcast style, we are shown what is supposed to be a radio broadcast talking about the killer. Not only does it mention that the killer sometimes just likes to tie people up, which is bizarre on its own and pretty creepy, he then mentions showing CCTV footage of the killer as if they're going to show it somehow over the radio, before doing this growl.
Criminal at the moment of a stop. Captured by our affiliated steadfast CCTV programs.
So not only does it not make sense that in-world a radio show would talk about showing footage, even if it was just going to be audio, that wouldn't make sense, especially when the footage is actually shown after this, and it's just the guy standing there. Not only is it supposed to be a radio broadcast, which is just audio, which means anyone listening in-world would not be able to see what they're going to show, but what's that growl? Is it supposed to be scary? Does the guy have indigestion? This could be just a me problem, but this throws off a lot of what I do think is pretty creepy in the second half of this video. The killer apparently begins chasing someone after they see him and does eventually get them. These visuals are pretty creepy, and you can even see that the person in the trash bag isn't seemingly dead. It looks like the trash bag's actually moving a little bit. It's spooky, but then all I can think about is the fact that a radio host said they're going to show footage and then growled. It just doesn't make sense. And last but not least, the last video is another helpful informational tape on how to sleep that again does anything but what it says it will. Again, a lot of things happen in this, and some of them are genuinely pretty creepy looking and sudden, but I just have no idea what's really going on. There is an implication that maybe the creatures are like making it hard for you to sleep or can mess with you mentally, and maybe they're also trying to keep you awake. It's really hard to tell. It seems to be maybe if you're kept awake too long or if you go to sleep, but it's all just kind of random. There are some scary faces that are popped up on screen. There's a person who transforms, and then we also see this monster here at the end, but I'm also just kind of like, what is all of this having to do with each other? My biggest guess for this tape is that while I've thought that maybe the monsters have to get you physically to like get into your body, that could be wrong. Maybe they just have to like wear you down mentally or can get into your mind and then somehow can establish themselves within your body. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, the tapes have implied that they're messing with the viewers and probably messing with the minds of people in Basswood County, but again, it's just so vague, I feel like. So yes, as you can tell, one of my biggest complaints in this series is that it's all very random, kind of a shotgun spray of analog horror. But before I really get into the critique of the rest of it, including that, I want to give my theory on what's going on in this series to the best of my ability, to try to make sense of all of it, even if it does feel difficult and pretty random to me. From the very beginning, the videos don't seem right. Of course, this is a cliche and a trope in analog horror, but I did mention that they all have this nightmare-like quality, and I do think that's intentional. While the videos are titled as informational, it seems that all of them are anything but, and the person who's making them, or whatever's making them, actually does not have the viewer's best interest at heart at all, and I know that's shocking. Whoever's making these tapes doesn't actually want me to get good sleep? What? That's blasphemy, I say. That's absolute blasphemy. From the horrifying images that are flashed on screen during what are meant to be peaceful or helpful moments, to unrelated and unnecessarily violent information that is provided to the viewers, and even things that directly threaten us. Despite constantly implying that they are being made for the residents of Basswood County, I don't think they're being made to help them. Not only do we have a warning sign in one of the tapes saying, hey, it's illegal to watch this, but we also see the identity test one sitting on the floor of the chamber where they come from, which kind of implies that the monsters actually have something to do with these different videotapes that these people are watching, and even if they're marked for Basswood County, I don't think they're being made by the government of Basswood County to help our citizens or whatever. Not to mention, as I've kind of joked about a couple of times already, why would you stay living in this place unless you had to? Like, honestly, if there was a place like Basswood County in real life and it was known, it would probably be a no-go zone. Like, hey, don't go here. There are monsters that will kill you and scoop out your insides and make you watch their weird artsy VHS tapes that have, like, scary faces interpolated over them. Obviously, what we have is an unreliable narrator situation, which there isn't really a narrator. More what I'm getting at is whoever is making these tapes or videos is obviously not out to help the people of Basswood County. Could be the monsters or some greater force that also has to do with the monsters. Could even be whatever is going on is propagated by these videos, like you watch them and then you slowly transform or something, which then makes the whole parasite thing a little confusing, but maybe the tapes are even being made for the monsters by the monsters as they slowly replace the residents of the county, and the people there are slowly just becoming a county full of monsters who all just live together and pretend that they're humans, which is really bizarre, but yeah. Joking aside, the most obvious thing is that there is something wrong with these tapes or videos. It's implied throughout the series that the monsters are possibly already affecting us, or the tapes themselves are haunted, or made by the monsters. It's not exact at any point throughout the series. There's just too many unanswered questions. I'll use these as some examples. In the episode The Chamber, the researchers come to Basswood County because of the disappearances, as if it's a mystery, but then immediately go to the chamber as if they know about the monsters. In the chamber, they're confused about the identity test tape on the ground, which implies that they've never heard of it, meaning that the county itself made it and it didn't leave the county, or that the monsters possibly made it, or that something outside of like human knowledge made it. The monsters seem to be almost like organic entities sometimes, almost being implied to be like parasites, but also spiritual, psychic, paranormal parasites that can like get into your mind. Smart enough to make these tapes, but also kind of animalistic. It seems kind of all over the place, that every time a new tape is coming out, there's some type of new idea. I would say that Basswood County is a no-go zone where no one actually lives there, but then there are parts that imply that people do live there, but also parts that imply that people don't know what's really going on there. Again, why is the identity tape on the ground? Are these being made for people and changed by things? We just don't know. It's just a bunch of random things that happen that imply things, but then they contradict other pieces of information. But yeah, my biggest guess is that the videos are implying that us as viewers, or whoever is watching it, are already infected or being taken over by the monsters or whatever is going on, which explains all of the strangeness, the appearing faces, the words on screen, the nightmare-like qualities of the videos. Everything that seems kind of random makes sense when you think about it like that. That's my core theory anyway. The videos are implying that we as viewers, or whoever we're looking at these videos through the eyes of, are becoming one of the creatures. We have been taken over, we're slowly losing our sanity and becoming a monster, and that's what's happening, at least from what I think. That's the only theory to me that really makes sense, considering everything, if you take everything into account. Now, this could all just be me. Maybe I'm just not looking at it from the right angle. Maybe there's just something I'm not getting or I overlooked, but I can't really piece this together in a way that makes sense to me. Also, to add to that, here's the timeline I said I'd make earlier in the video. I did this in hopes of maybe something clicking for me and like making more sense, but in all honesty, when I looked at this and I thought more about it, it just made things even more confusing. And that is still one of my biggest complaints of the series. To me, Basswood County looks as if DarkMind wanted to make a series as a way to string together some of his horror creations and ideas, and usually an analog horror series on YouTube do better than individual analog horror shorts like he was making. So there is nothing wrong with wanting to make a series that's connected like this. It's just that the story itself is loose and all over the place, and at times feels like it barely connects. The series does end up feeling very disjointed because of this. Things that are introduced at points contradict other stuff, and even when you think of the videos themselves being made by an unreliable narrator or the monsters or someone who doesn't care to give reliable information to the viewer, it can kind of work, but it can still feel frustrating for a viewer if you think about it too much, especially if the scares aren't doing it for you, and I did find the scares to be very hit or miss. The pacing also to be very hit or miss. There are long stretches of characters just walking around with nothing happening before cutting to something completely different. Long stretches of just black screens, segments that I feel could be cut and would actually make the video better or more impactful, like the last 50 seconds of the first video that I mentioned at the start. There's also a handful of errors throughout the series and parts that are funny enough that they almost made me laugh and feel like it was a purposeful parody, and maybe they are. There's nothing wrong with the series having elements of parody in it, it's just that I couldn't tell if it was intentional or not because some parts of it felt like they were meant to be taken very seriously, and these funny parts can throw off the tone of the whole video, especially in the aspect of like the impact that scares or other parts can have. The killer tape is another great example of that. In the middle, you have this radio host who growls after saying he's going to show you footage, despite the fact that it's been stated it's a radio show, and then the ending has this moment where there is a body wrapped up in a trash bag and duct tape, and it seems to even be moving a little bit. That's pretty creepy, but it's kind of thrown off by this part in the middle, in my opinion. A lot of my core complaints about the randomness and the disjointed nature of this story and series comes back to the nightmare-like nature of videos that DarkMind makes. I did watch a lot of his other videos, the little shorts, and they're all made in a similarly structured way, but they're not trying to connect in some type of overall story. Again, I'll use the last moments of Identity Test as an example of this. I like the way that these last scenes play out. I think the statue monster is cool. I like the idea of someone watching themselves on TV and then seeing that they're being watched by something, but what does this have to do with anything else? Like, is the monster actually filming this guy? Why are we being shown this statue monster? What does it have to do with the Identity Test? What does it have to do with the failure of Jeff Alberson? I mean, where did the Jeff Alberson thing even come from? Again, if you focus on this as thinking that these are haunted videotapes, and so there's going to be an element of randomness there to scare you, it can still work, but I still question it. I still think, like, what was the intent behind this? And it doesn't always stick when I think with that in mind. If it seems like I'm being harsh, I'm definitely not trying to be. I genuinely do think DarkMind has a lot of creative energy and potential. While watching his videos, I did watch a few of his older shorts and happened upon one that I really liked. And in a lot of ways, it's similar to Basswood County. It's called 4 AM I'm in a Nightmare, and while having some of the elements I complain about in this series, I think it stands on its own because it is its own thing. It is a singular video that isn't trying to connect to other things. It's just a very fun, nightmare-like video with some awesome visuals to match it. DarkMind uses lots of different little bits of stop motion, of real-life video. He's made little masks and different costumes and things like that. Some of the effects he uses play off very well and are just fun little visuals to me. This video by itself reminds me of one of the nightmare sequences from like a David Lynch movie. DarkMind is obviously a creator who is using what he has to make something, and I always commend that. He's a small YouTuber and possibly making these videos on a small to no budget, and when you keep that in mind, it can help give you perspective on a series like this. That doesn't mean you can't dislike it, of course. I obviously have a lot of critiques. I think he could work out a story for all of this that connects better. I think he could make a bit more consistency, maybe have a bit more linearity to it. I mean, that's just a complaint I have. I've looked at his comments, and there are a lot of people who genuinely really like these videos, even with the confusing nature of them. I think that's part of what draws them in, and so maybe he shouldn't change anything at all. So, to summarize, I didn't really like Basswood County very much. I think it has pretty bad pacing issues, moments that are more silly than scary, and a plot that is pretty nonsensical, and I mostly think that last one's on purpose, but it didn't really work for me. I also think some of the scares don't land, even the ones that aren't funny. They're just not scary, or they're kind of annoying. But I also want to admit that I don't watch these series like normal people would. To explain, when I make these videos, I watch these series over and over and over while making them. I probably, before even editing this, watched this series front to back 3 or 4 times, not to mention the amount of times I had to watch these videos while editing. Most normal people wouldn't even watch this series twice. They would watch it once and then move on, and then some people watch it like twice. I watched it once and enjoyed it okay enough, but knew that I needed to watch it again to really cement my opinion. And so I rewatched it to cement my opinion, to pick through the finer details. And over time, I made the realizations I did, that I didn't really like it. And I want to say that Basswood County isn't special. I do that with almost anything on this channel. Sometimes I only have to watch something twice. Sometimes I have to watch it 3 or 4 times. That's just kind of the way it is to make these videos the way I do. Despite having a lot of problems with the series, I do hope that DarkMind continues it, and I want to see him grow as a creator. I like seeing people who do things different even if they don't click with me. I like seeing people who experiment. Going back to being a bit more positive, as I said earlier, my 2 favorite parts of the series were definitely Identity Test and The Chamber. These feel like they had the most effort put into them and tried to summon something up to connect them to the overall story. And while still having a lot of parts that I found disjointed and random, I did like certain parts of them a lot. The end sequence of Identity Test, while random, did have some pretty cool art and interesting stuff going on. The beginning of The Chamber with the original founder, as well as the exploration of it, represented through this map with these different sound effects, almost feeling like a point-and-click or a text adventure game, I found that really neat. And I will add that as the series goes on, it does improve. The latter videos definitely don't suffer from some of the problems that the earlier videos do, like the fact that there are segments that just go on for a long time for no reason, people just walking around the driving thing and the Jeff Alberson tape. The later videos don't suffer from that, but they still do suffer from the confusing plot that doesn't seem to know what it wants to do. I may not love Basswood County, but I can see the passion in it and the other works that DarkMind has made, and I hope he does keep improving his works and experimenting with them. You can see more of his hand-drawn art and digital art over on his Instagram or his Twitter, which I do recommend you go and check out, of course. And also go watch some of his shorts or the whole series for yourself. Besides Basswood County, he's made a lot of stuff, and I genuinely think some of it is pretty cool to look at. Anyway, I'm GhostsOnHoliday. Thanks for letting me haunt you for just a little bit, and remember,